when the health inspector found a severed human finger in a bowl of clam chowder at Harper's Diner. The small coastal town of Blackridge fell silent. The news spread like wildfire. The diners screamed. The cops came. And by midnight, the cook had vanished. But no one suspected the owner until the freezer in the basement was opened. Chapter 1: The Quiet Heat of the Kitchen. It was a Monday morning like any other at Harper's Diner. Nestled on the edge of Maine's rocky coast. The smell of coffee brewed with cracked beans and day-old bacon grease hung in the air like a curtain. Joe Carter, the head cook, had been working the grill for 6 years. He was 37, lean, and moved with the tired precision of a man who had made more pancakes than he'd seen smiles in a year. Joe rarely talked. He came in before dawn, left after dark, and lived in a rundown trailer behind the diner. Some said he had no family. Others said he had run away from something, though no one dared to ask what. The owner of Harper's Diner was Clyde Harper, a bulky man in his 50s, with a booming voice and a gut that hung over his belt like a sack of dough. Clyde had inherited the place from his father, and the diner was his kingdom. He walked the floor with pride, flipping napkin holders, adjusting salt shakers, and barking at waitresses like a captain running a tight ship. But underneath that grin, Clyde had secrets. And Joe knew every one of them. Chapter 2: The Meat Delivery. On the third Wednesday of October, a delivery truck from Hastings Meats pulled into the alley behind the diner. Joe met the driver, signed the slip, and hauled in 2 huge boxes of beef and poultry. But one box was different. It wasn't labeled. It had no invoice. And it was cold, too cold. Joe stared at it for a long while. Then, silently, he dragged it into the freezer. Later that night, he returned. Alone. He opened the box. Inside was raw meat, but not like anything he'd ever seen. The texture was wrong. The cuts too clean, the pieces too human. Joe didn't call the police. He didn't tell Clyde. He just closed the box, sat on a stool, and lit a cigarette with shaking fingers. Chapter 3: The Missing Dishwasher. The next morning, Clyde yelled across the kitchen. "Where the hell is Bobby? He didn't show last night." Joe flipped a pancake. "Didn't see him." Bobby was a kid, barely 18. He washed dishes and mopped floors, always humming some old country tune. Now he was gone. Clyde shrugged it off. Kids these days. But Joe noticed something. The boots Bobby always left by the back door, muddy, worn, size 9, were gone. And the floor beneath them had been scrubbed clean. Too clean. Chapter 4: Whispers and Grease. 2 days later, the waitress Ruby pulled Joe aside. "You hear what people are saying? That's something weird's going on. First Bobby, now Shelley's missing too. She ain't been home in 2 nights." Joe's eyes darkened. Shelley was a waitress, single mom, sweet as pie. Ruby leaned in. "Clyde's acting real strange. He was in here at 3 a.m. last night. Said he was checking inventory. But the lights were off. I saw it from across the street. Just the glow of the freezer." Joe didn't answer. But later that day, he opened that box again. This time, he found something new. A woman's gold necklace. Still warm. Chapter 5: Boiling Point. Joe started locking his trailer. He started watching Clyde more closely. And when he checked the back alley camera, the one no one thought worked, he saw footage from 3 nights ago. Clyde dragging something heavy in a tarp. The timestamp: 2:54 a.m. Joe printed the footage, folded it, slid it into his apron. He had a plan now. That night, after closing, Joe cooked one last pot of clam chowder. He added extra seasoning. And he dropped the necklace into the bottom of the pot. Chapter 6: The Inspection. Friday morning, the health inspector came unannounced. Clyde tried to charm him. "Best chowder in the state. Go on, try a bowl." The inspector nodded, took a spoonful and stopped. "What the hell is this?" he said, fishing something out. It was the necklace. Ruby screamed. A customer stood and backed away. Cops were called. Questions shouted. Joe stood in the kitchen doorway, apron on, arms crossed. Check the freezer, he said. Chapter 7, The Freezer. Inside the basement freezer, they found the box. Inside the box were human remains. Tissue samples, bones, the unmistakable shape of a foot. But here's the twist, Clyde denied everything. He said Joe planted it. Said Joe was the crazy one. Said he found Joe once talking to himself in the dark. Joe was arrested. But then the tapes came out. Footage from the alley. Footage from the basement. And a third tape, one Joe had hidden in his locker. It showed Clyde in the freezer, speaking to someone who wasn't there. Chapter 8, Trial by Fire. The trial was a circus. The media called it the Harper Diner cannibal case. Clyde pleaded not guilty. Joe testified. So did Ruby. The jury watched the tapes. They listened to the 911 call from Shelley's daughter. And in the end, the verdict was read. Guilty on all counts. Clyde Harper was sentenced to life. Joe walked out of court a free man. But he never returned to the diner. Chapter 9, Aftertaste. Months later, a new diner opened in the same spot. New paint. New owners. But the same freezer. Joe moved inland. Changed his name. Bought a small food truck. He still cooks chowder. But every time he opens a new can of clams, he checks it twice. And every time he sees someone wearing a gold necklace, his hands shake. Because even now, in quiet towns like Blackridge, some secrets are served hot. And some orders never leave the kitchen.